So welcome to Manna Hill Estate.
Thank you very much.
Just a little bit about the property. We started here in 2002. Darren Doherty, who most of you met a couple of days ago, he actually did the design. Most of you may remember that 2002 was also the start of the millennium drought. So most people say, oh, you know, you'll get a commercial crop within 3 years, and it's like 10 years later, we've eventually got there. Obviously we have some olives here, so there's about 2,500 trees. We have agroforestry, we have a couple of coops over there, one over there. Plus we have, in the lower area, we have an agroforestry plot, wide space, long rotation. So oaks, typically a 400-year rotation. Some of the other trees there hopefully are slightly less that, sequoias, those sorts of things. So multi-generational. For the last 8 years we've had sheep, but with the coming El Nino, when that warning came out, I thought time to get out of sheep before the price collapsed, which it subsequently did, and then it rained. But anyway, that's a different story. The sheep through the alleys, they will ring bark your trees. It became very, very management intensive, and so in the end I thought, until I get a better system. I was using Kiwi Tech fencing, which is probably one of the fastest fencing systems to put up and down in terms of electric fencing, but running 3 wires for sheep, it still took too much time. So we don't have sheep on the place at the moment. Certifications, we're certified organic, we're certified biodynamic, which means that we use the BD 500 or Solution 500 as Phil referred to it. So we apply that twice a year in autumn and in spring when you get the sort of conditions that you're likely to get BD 500 to work. Just in terms of the soil here, and you know, we have some of the oldest soils on the east coast of Australia. So the soils here are Ordovician, they don't go very far, and so just in terms of that, that's 500 million years ago. Very, very old. You only have to go 3 kilometres, less than 2 miles north of here, and you drop into the volcanic country, and that's only 60,000 years old. So that soil is really new. They grow lots of spuds and other stuff in it. So I couldn't afford that sort of country, so we've got this really crap soil, very low in nutrients. Having said that, in terms of, so my first soil test, I got available nutrients. Basically it says you're short of everything except for iron. And iron you've got way too much of. And iron locks you up, as Phil indicated, there's lots of issues associated with iron. The other thing is that our soil started off at a pH of about 4.5 20 years ago. So what have we done in the intervening period? I mulch when everything's growing, no sense growing at the moment. It hasn't rained here since early January, so over 2 months, haven't had a drop of water. And our last decent rain was really start of December, so it's nearly 3 months with very little moisture. And you can see that in terms of the pastures certainly drying off.
So at the moment, where's your happiness scale with whether you have or haven't got sheep?
Very high at the moment. I'm sort of pretty happy not to have sheep on the place till, you know, probably a bit later. But it does mean that some of that nutrient cycling that you get, the kangaroos are doing it for me, because I've got big mobs of roos coming in and doing that for me at night. It's sort of unmanaged. And so at some point I do want to get back into sheep. But certainly no harm in not having sheep on the place at the moment. Johnson Sioux compost, big believer in Johnson Sioux compost. I use my agroforestry prunings, I chip them, turn them into Johnson Sioux compost. So I'm looking for a fungal dominated compost. As Ray was talking about this morning, you know, in that continuum from a very bacterial dominated soil through to a very fungal dominated soil. So a rainforest, it's about 1,000 fungi to every bacteria. At the other end of the scale, you're sort of much more bacterially dominated. I'm growing trees plus pasture, so I'm looking for a more fungal dominated soil. So if you buy a compost directly from any of the compost manufacturers, they're trying to meet the Australian standard, and they'll churn it out in 4 to 6 weeks and be able to give the tick and say, yep, we've met the Australian standard. it'll be a totally bacterially dominated compost. So you either let it sit for a fair time and keep it moist to get some fungal growth in it, or you can use something like Johnson Sioux. Again, it's a long period of time, typically 1 to 2 years, but you end up with a very fungal dominated soil. I could do an extract out of that and spray it on.
You don't need much material either.
Oh no, you need like 5 kilos into a 20 litre bucket, and that'll do sort of like 10 acres, or 20 acres I think. So I just use IBCs, and the one I've got there at the moment was 2 IBCs high. It's now down to 1 because it's composted that much, and if you dig your hand into it, looks like soil to some extent. Multi-species covers, so I do run multi-species covers. I've tried lots of different drills, put it in. The other thing, when we first started, we had 2 species. We had capeweed, and that was basically everything on the high side. I had a lovely crop of flowers. It was just completely yellow, the whole paddock. And then in the lower areas, we have bent grass. I've still got the bent grass, virtually have no capeweed left. And so, we've planted quite a few things over the years. I'm now using Grant Sims multi-species covers. He has about 14 different species, and I'm direct drilling that. In the bent grass, I'm still not getting enough disturbance. So it's just an air seeder on a old rotary hoe, cut the rotors down so you end up with essentially a strip rotary hoe with an air seeder on it, and you can do it for a smaller place like this. I don't need a 3 metre machine. Sprays, so I talked about the BD 500. I also make my own effective microorganisms, which essentially is a lactic acid bacteria and fungi. So I spray that out. I use foliar sprays exclusively. I found them much more effective, and the trees react a lot faster. I've found that a much better way to do it. I think John Kempf says that foliar sprays are 15 to 30 times more effective than a soil drench. So also fish, kelp, vermicast extracts. So I've used Nutrisoil. I think for what you pay for, Nutrisoil is best as a seed drench rather than as a soil drench. For me anyway, I don't get the value out of a soil drench, but as a seed drench, it's fantastic. What else should I touch on? Oh, results. Okay, so soil depth when we got here, the soil depth in terms of that carbon layer before you went into the rock and clay underneath was about 50 mil, about 2 inches. It's all right. And that's probably being generous.
Yeah.
It's about a foot, 300 mil. So I've gone from 50 mil to 300 mil over that time. pH has gone from 4.5 to 6.8.
Wow. Well done.
That's perfect.
I think Albert would say I've gone a bit too far. He'd say 6.4. But 6.8 I'm pretty happy with. And
you might be at 6.4 because again, I don't know if pH is that accurate.
Yeah.
Right.
You just have to get it in perspective.
I'm not.
You're in a good range.
Yeah, that's right. I'm in the happy spot as far as phave is concerned.
The plants modify the pH right near the roots anyway.
Happy.
So
We can get 3 out of him.
Have you noticed Campbell said he's in a happy spot?
in a happy spot with pH, absolutely.
Having capeweed everywhere to not having capeweed and all that sort of stuff is indicators, isn't it?
Yeah, that we've changed the soil biology, and my organic matter's gone from about 4% to 8%. And
That's in the top right.
so that's in the top 200 mil. Because I'm growing trees,
Yeah.
I want to go a bit deeper than people who are just cropping or whatever. So I do in fact take the top 200 mil, 8 inches, in terms of my soil samples. So that's in the...
The interesting thing, it was 4% before.
Yeah, that's what I reckon.
Yeah.
I reckon that was way too high for what it was before.
Yeah, I'm just going from what the test said. Just in terms of my monitoring, as I indicated this morning, we use a microbiometer to just I do this twice a year, spring and autumn. With microbiometer, the soil's got to be damp, so I couldn't do one now. So that measures fungal to bacterial ratios. and my recent test, which was last September, was indicating that my fungal ratio was up around 70% to 30% bacteria. So again, I'm pretty happy with that, because when we started off, it was way the other way. We were very bacterially dominated. 20% fungal, 80% bacteria. I do soil health checks, and we're probably going to do some of those. So infiltration test, do soil cover, species diversity within, I just got a little stick thing which I throw out. And
what's the best number you got there? Tell us the two ends of the high and the low, and then...
Yeah, so probably when I first started, 2. Yeah, 2 species. And, I'm up around 12 to 15. Probably my best has been 15. But in a square metre, yeah. The other thing is bird biodiversity, which is something not many people measure, but bird biodiversity is a very good indicator of ecosystem biodiversity. So I look at the number of birds we've had, and we've more than doubled that in the time that we've been here. So when we first got here, over a period of, we saw about 40 species of birds, and last year we saw 83.
Doing your own monitoring, or do you get someone in to do it?
I'm actually doing my own. If I see a bird, which I saw one the other day, so I take a photograph of it and then go out and say, what's this? And it was one of the honey eaters that I hadn't seen here before. Yeah, some of that biodiversity was driven by, we had a really wet summer last summer. Yeah. And so we were seeing some water birds that we hadn't seen before. Like all these trees we have planted, other than the pine trees, which were here, but every other tree on the place basically we have planted. So the shelter belts, the agroforestry, the olives. So that's increased the biodiversity. And in our shelter belts, you'll see that it is multi-species, as is our agroforestry. So we have little shrubs. One of the things I really love is sweet brassica. And I don't know why even conventional farmers don't grow sweet brassica around the outside, because one of the things that reproduces as a result of sweet brassica is a wasp. And the wasp actually eats the cockchafer grub. And a lot of people will complain about, oh, we've got cockchafer grubs everywhere. And you say, okay, where's your sweet brassica? Like, where have you provided the habitat for the predator species that are going to go after it? So, again, some of these things you can fix it using the ecology and the ecosystems that you generate as a result of that. You'll see that, we've got lots of different species. Even though we have a range of eucalypts, we also have, acacias and melaleucas and she oaks, so casuarinas.
What variety of olives are you growing?
So I grow 2, Frantoios and Corregiolas, so not a great deal of variability there. They're both from Tuscany, and which is an Italian area, and their climate is sort of similar to ours, which is why I selected them, is that it sometimes snows in Tuscany and it sometimes snows here. You wouldn't believe it today, but it gets really cold in winter. Depending on the summer, we get long sort of summer days. The interesting thing about olives is that they actually grow in a very narrow temperature band. It's like everyone thinks, olives grow everywhere, but they only grow when the temperature's between 20 and 30 degrees.
Oh, wow.
So even during a normal day, you won't get much growth until it gets up to 20, and then they start growing. And if it goes over 30, they stop growing. So, when you see them on those really, really hot days, they're all shut down. They only grow in a relatively narrow temperature band.
How often are you doing your monitoring?
Twice a year. I do it typically around the equinox in spring and autumn. The equinox is sort of my target date.
Yep.
It can drift a little bit. It's not critical. It depends on, is there soil moisture or is there not soil moisture? No. I know. I was talking to Phil before, and he says, "Oh, you should be doing your shovel test every day." So I just okay. I do walk around the place every single day. It's amazing what you can pick up just by looking. So before we got here, it was set stocked, which is why, the cape weed was rampant. It's just,
Cape Weed and Cooch. Cooch is nature's survivor.
You
Right.
said the range was 68 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 20 to 30, what you said. How long does that range have to be kept? If you go outside that range, does that kill the tree? Or?
No, it just stops growing. It just shuts down all the stomata.
So that's the range it prefers to be at.
Correct. That's what it's growing.
And so what period of the time of the year that needs to happen?
So it actually grows all year round if given the right conditions. So it doesn't completely shut down in winter. They still will grow as long as it's at temperature.
So what I would love to grow olives, but I know we're too humid probably, and we're probably too cold. So where is it too cold to grow olives?
The issue's not the actual how cold it gets, it's what your frosts are like. Because they'll handle, deep snow, but if it freezes, that's not good for them. So you've got to stop it from a frost. Yeah, it's the frost that'll knock them off. Like in Italy a few years ago, so probably 7 or 8, they had a -20 frost and it wiped out huge numbers of olive trees. When I say it wiped them out to ground level. They then, you cut it off and it regrows again, but it took all the top out. But if it snows, no problems, because the snow tends to insulate the leaves.
Without snow in the cold, that really gets it.
Correct.
Okay. Because snow acts like a blanket.
Yes. Yeah. So, what are some of the things I'd like to do? One is I'd like to have a lot less bent grass than I have. It's great ground cover, and you can mow it, and it's still resilient, which is why they use it in lawn mixers. You can mow the hell out of it, and it just keeps on coming back. And if you keep the water up to it, it'll stay green. But it does tend to, because of the way it grows, it will just kill out everything else. And you end up with essentially a monoculture. And we actually have our own variety here called Ballarat Bent, which is...
Is that cooch?
No, it's not a cooch.
Light cooch or not?
Well, I can show you lots, so we can go and have a look at some Ballarat bent grass. The other thing is we've had 3 wet summers in a row, and so some of the trees you can see have got some yellow leaves on them. That's a fungal disease called peacock spot, and so that's the other thing that I'd like to address in some way. And so I'm going to spray lactobacillus, and hopefully then, because essentially the lactobacillus gets on the leaf, bacteria then eat the lactobacillus, and then it creates byproducts, and some of those byproducts will kill the fungi.
Have you tried Casuarina BD?
BD, yeah, I've sprayed BD. So I spray BD every 6 months.
The Casuarina mix?
No, not a Casuarina mix.
How do you spray it?
Just an air blast sprayer. Tiny droplets, you're trying to get complete leaf cover. So yeah, that's what I use.
What do you attribute that massive change in pH to?
I put lime on in the first 2 years, basically saw no impact whatsoever. The only thing that I can really put it to is the change in the biology. Is that by changing the biology, we've actually changed the way in which the soil works, and it's made things that are available more available than they were. And it was really interesting talking to Colin Seiss, who got me into Biodynamics and BD 500, basically because he said, I went to a workshop of his quite a number of years ago, and he said the most active thing he'd ever seen under a microscope was BD 500.
Wow.
I sprayed a stretch of my olives on the far side, and I saw absolutely zero difference in the trees. Looked at these trees, looked at those trees. No, I can't see any difference. But the difference in the grass was quite marked, as in you could see where the spray had cut out as a grass line.
Okay.
And I thought, it's doing something.
Yep.
So I thought, yeah, okay, I'm in for this. So that's when I started.
Yep. And do you buy your lactobacillus, or do you make the mix?
I make it myself. Yeah, so you start off with rice, then I use milk.
Yep.
I just use powder.
Okay.
It's the cheapest way to do it. You can use calf milk powder,
Yep.
The thing is that, because it's as long as it doesn't have antibiotics in it. The advantage is the really cheap stuff, which is stuff, I'm a cheap guy, I go for the cheap stuff. It doesn't have antibiotics in it. If you go for the expensive stuff, the gold stuff, generally they call it, it has antibiotics in it. I don't want that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
You said you're using powder milk?
Yep.
How come you don't use raw milk?
Mightn't be able to get it.
Because it's just it's hard to get.
Calcium magnesium ratio, was it improved?
Yes, it has, because there's a lot more calcium now. I haven't added it,
No,
but in terms of the soil test, it's saying, yeah, there's a lot more calcium available.
the fungi do that.
Yeah.
And Campbell, your soil test would have shown that you were living in poverty land,
Yes.
and it'd be interesting if you ran the same soil test now, it would show, and it would be really interesting if you could do a Haney test 20 years and now.
Yeah, so agreed. So I have done a conventional test. I didn't at the start, so I don't know what it looked like at the start, but the total, I now look at totals rather than available, because to some extent, available, yeah, okay, it is what, whatever can be extracted by phosphoric acid or whatever they're using. It's like, yeah, well, that's not terribly interesting. What is really interesting is what is there that I can potentially extract. And the only things that we're sort of borderline on in terms of totals is zinc and boron, both of which the trees need.
Yep.
Yeah, boron in particular.
So you do that by,
So I do that via foliar spray.
yep, okay. And how much boron would you put on?
So I put 2 litres of Nutritech solution, 2 litres per hectare. But I can't tell you off the top of my head what the concentration of that is.
Is that grams eight?
That's Graham Sate, yeah, Nutritech.
Have you tested your olive oil for nutrient density, phytonutrients, and all these other complexities of it?
I test them for about 5 different things. There's about 5 things I test the olive oil for, and I've got a record of that going back since we first
Do they
started
have a
producing.
standard, or do you exceed that standard? What is the standard for?
To be an extra virgin olive oil, the maximum you're allowed to be is 0.8%. We're at 0.08.
Right.
So way, way below the allowable limit. And interestingly, if we're talking about olive oil, is that the Australian Olive Association went to the supermarket, bought up all the imported olive oils, sample of them, all the extra virgin imported olive oils, and Italian stuff, and God knows what else. And there was about 80 of them, all branded as extra virgin.
Can you explain that the oxygen part with it being lower? I don't quite know what that means.
Okay, so the oleic acid level rises as it oxidises.
Okay.
And so olive oil oxidises few things. Probably the worst one is heat. That's why cold press is better, for sure, but also storage. Like a lot of people store their olive oil over in the cupboard over the stove. It's like, because it's handy, but that's the worst place you can store your olive oil. The other thing is light. So you've got to keep the light away from it, which is why they're in a dark bottle typically. But again, yeah, as long as you've got it in a cupboard, you're probably okay with that. But the biggest one is temperature. Yeah, to some extent you shouldn't sell it in plastic. It's an oil, and oils are very good at pulling the plasticizers out of plastic. So as a general rule, you want to make sure it's stored in something like glass, stainless steel, etc.